track. I realized that the only thing between my talk and lunch is 40 minutes, so I will try and get through it. I'm Liron Pantanowitz. I'm at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and Bruce Friedman asked me to talk about digital pathology consultation, because in the world of digital pathology today, consultation has become very easy. Now, at UPMC, we've been doing this for at least a decade, probably more, 12 years. So I would like to run through our experience in that decade in this era of digital pathology consultation. I have no conflicts of interest, unfortunately. So, 3 objectives. 1, I'm going to run through the different modes in which you can practice telepathology. And by doing that, I'm going to share the UPMC experience that we've had with each one of these teleconsultation methods. And by doing that, we'll review the lessons we've learned in practicing with these different modes of telepathology. Now, there are many definitions for telepathology, but what I want to focus on in this talk is the use of digital imaging, specifically for telediagnosis. Now, because the FDA haven't approved it for primary diagnosis, we're still able to use it, for example, for frozen sections, and also second and even tertiary opinions. So I'm focusing it mainly on diagnostic purposes, not on any of the educational components, and teleconferencing, for example, is often used. Most people talk about telepathology in the AP anatomical pathology environment, and that's true. It is heavily utilized, and we at the University of Pittsburgh have used it for our frozen sections, for surgical pathology cases, for telecytology. Some places have used it for reviewing EM images. We don't do that. But also, it's applicable to clinical pathology, CP, and we use it for telehematology, at least that's looking at blood smears remotely with digital technology. It's used infrequently for the other purposes, like sharing a parasite with someone, so I'm not going to focus on that. So this is the only slide that's going to address sort of some of the basics of telepathology. There are 3 modes in which you can practice telepathology. So the first would be the store and forward. You take a picture, you send it to someone, or leave it on a server that they can access it. There are pros and cons to that method. So you'll see, obviously, when we got involved in this area of teleconsultation, that was one way in which we began our practice. Believe it or not, in today's age, there is still a role for store and forward telepathology, which I will show you. We then moved on to more dynamic systems. So if you attach a video camera, for example, to your microscope, you can share that live image, or if you have a robotic microscope, you can control that image. And then with the advent of whole site imaging and these scanners, how have we utilized that technology for teleconsultation? So even within the city of Pittsburgh, we have a difficult geographic infrastructure. We have 20 medical centers, and we have a lot of subspecialists. We call that our center of excellence. So we concentrate our subspecialists in one particular hospital. So for example, we have all our neuropathologists in one hospital. However, neurosurgery happens at many different medical centers. It's not cost effective to have our neuropathologist go to those particular hospitals. So for many years now, we've relied on telepathology, even within the city of Pittsburgh, to perform frozen sections. We've also partnered with other medical centers, hospitals outside of Pittsburgh, in other states, and for many years, and more recently, we've partnered with other centers in other countries, China and Italy, for example. So I will share that experience with you at the national, our local, national, and then international level. So this didn't happen without us investing in technology. This is a rough time frame of all the different things that we've acquired. This isn't obviously comprehensive, but even back in '98, we had invested in image management solutions. We started in 2000 with static telepathology to actually support clinical services. We purchased video conferencing software. We purchased a networked camera that we could put on to microscopes. Back in 2003, we purchased one of the earlier perio scanners. In fact, we had to, at that point, save all the images onto DVDs, which ultimately got moved onto a network server when that became available. We participated in global teleconsultation. We partnered with IPATH. We landed up buying 2 trestle systems. Some of them are still in place, and now are Zeiss systems. We had purchased newer Olympus digital cameras. We had invested in several different whole slide scanners, Hamamatsu, Zeiss, and Mirax. In 2009, we began developing our own whole slide scanner, which is the Omnic scanner. And today, in 2011 and 2012, all these different applications that are still in place are now accessible via Citrix for our pathologists, both within our intranet and if they're traveling on the internet. So we've acquired a lot of technology, a lot of experience. As you can see, back in 2004, using it used to be called TV or video microscopy, network cameras. So we've had a lot of experience with varying platforms of digital imaging. So we've evolved from TV all the way to whole slide scanners. So our practice of telepathology has evolved in alignment with the evolution of the technology. Secondly, as you can see on the bottom screen, now many of these applications that are used by our pathologists are available via Citrix. So let's begin with static telepathology, write, store, and forward. So the first time we really utilized this was in our transplant pathology service. For those of you who know, it's not that easy sometimes to practice transplant pathology. The best outcome is if you have an expert in transplant pathology. So we have several transplant pathologists who have been looking at biopsies from transplant patients or also from donor organs. In order to support a transplant service at another hospital, which we do in Italy, for example, this service has to be available 24/7. That means that the pathologist has to be available 24/7, but so does the technical support. The communication had to be obviously within a secured network. So it's okay if you're dealing with hospitals within your own city, but now we're dealing with network connectivity in different countries. And there had to be some sort of mechanism for pathologist to pathologist from Italy and Pittsburgh to be able to communicate. And I'll show you in a slide or two how that was accomplished. So static telepathology was very successful in supporting this transplant pathology service. These are some early data back in 1999 to 2000. You can see it was not perfect. Using static images, 86% of the time there was agreement with cases. Fortunately, we were able to retrieve slides and blocks in difficult cases. Very few major clinical issues arose out of differences, but they did back then. So the partner we have in Italy is known as ISMET. That's the Mediterranean Institute for Transplantation, and they're located in Palermo, Italy. They were established in '97, and they began partnering with us in '99 for teleconsultation. So today, which is 12 years later, we've looked at 3,000 telepathology cases for them. And as you can imagine, we evolved from the first generation, which was the static imaging, to a second, third, and fourth generation. So what we have in place now in 2009 is a Mirax whole slide scanner. So this was the initial system that was set up, which was the store and forward telepathology method. You can see, I just want to see if my mouse will work. Over here, that's Italy. Italy, which was our client, would log into the system, upload the metadata, clinical information, as well as their static images that their pathologist had taken. Our UPMC pathologist could log into the same secured system, which was firewall protected, to view those images, report, and if necessary, communicate with the pathologist. So we no longer practice that way. But because at least for 10 years now, we were involved in telepathology, we've acquired a lot of experience in the practice of digital pathology. As a result of that, the workflow has been ironed out. So we now have very few bottlenecks when it comes to telepathology for the transplant service. In addition, over these years, we've acquired a lot of key resources, not only the funding and the equipment, but we now have staff and IT support to support whole slide imaging telepathology. So the standard practice now for transplant telepathology is multiplexed slides that are scanned with whole slide imaging, for which we can perform both bright field and fluorescence microscopy and perform image analysis. So the image at the bottom shows you the current state of transplant pathology which is, so I'm going to use the pointer because the mouse is too sensitive. So we're able to now scan routinely cases in at 40x. It's perfect for transplant pathologists to interpret cases accurately. We're able to, because these are all digitized, compare cases side by side. You can see a biopsy at 9 months, 36 months, and have built-in image analysis, quantify fibrosis and so forth. So there's been a great advantage for getting in the field early. But we haven't totally adopted static telepathology. As I said, we have many hospitals. Many of these are cancer, some of these are cancer centers, and so we have a lot of sick patients, and a lot of peripheral blood smears are performed. We do not have expert hematologists at every hospital. However, our heme techs who are reviewing these blood smears sometimes encounter difficult cases, need confirmation if they're dealing with leukemia, blast, etc., and so they need to share those with the expert hematopathologist. So in order to do that, we purchased a few cellular vision devices. The cellular vision device digitizes the peripheral blood smear. It also classifies the peripheral blood smear, performs the CBC and diff, but the heme tech can now select difficult images and based on a store and forward method, by email, notify the hematopathologist who can review that. So as a result, we've standardized the care in hematology using telehematology in this fashion. Two things. We looked at this device, and it's pretty good but not perfect at classifying cells in an automated fashion. Sometimes you still need human intervention. And now that we have the images digitized and the peripheral blood smear is digitized, we can look at opportunities to incorporate this in the electronic medical record. So no longer do we have to have heme-onc docs, hematologists wanting to come look at the blood smears in the lab. They can view these in the electronic medical record. We have not accomplished that yet. So here's the cellular division device. It's really pretty small, not that big. It digitizes, categorizes all the cells for you. And as you can see, if we have our techs have difficulty classifying, making a diagnosis in certain cases, using a store and forward method, hematopathologists can review that. And so we have several of those in place, and they have been successful for us. So I'd like to now talk about the next mode of telepathology, which is video microscopy. Essentially what that is just attaching a video camera to the top of your microscope. The problem with that is you do have to have someone driving that slide, communicating with someone who's going to be looking at that slide. There are sometimes problems with video cameras. Video signals degrade more than digital images, so you have to convert that sometimes to a digital image. Now, in the field of telecytology, there is sometimes a need for a cytopathologist to review a slide on site, such as for a rapid on-site assessment, and sometimes the cytopathologist cannot be present when that happens. If you look at the literature, most of the literature in the field of telecytology talks about static telepathology. So that is not great for a rapid assessment. If you have time to evaluate a case, that's perfect. To be honest, and this is not well published, if you look at dynamic video telecytology, that is what's most often practiced, at least here in the US, on a daily basis. And that's the method that we've adopted at UPMC. We did try robotic microscopes. While it works, and I'll show you one or two images, it's cumbersome and it's not practical on a daily basis when you're doing many cases. And whole slide imaging is still investigational. Yes, we're trying it and we're playing around with it, but we haven't really adopted that in our clinical practice now. So for an on-site assessment, a fellow or a cytotech would review the case, and if the pathologist cannot get there to view the case, we can remotely just log on through Citrix and view that case. Now, we've left it optional for cytopathologists to participate and perform telecytology in that manner. Some people feel that they would prefer to walk the distances and see the case. Some people have found, in fact, if there's a language barrier with some of our fellows and it's difficult to communicate, they would prefer not to perform it in that fashion. So we haven't mandated it, but we've made the technology available. So how good is this technology? So I'm a practicing cytopathologist, and when I am called to look at a slide, there are two things I want to determine from that slide. The first thing I want to see is the material adequate? So the blue is a microscope, the yellow is the video camera. And you can see that using video microscopy, there's really no difference when you look at cytopathologists making a call that the material is adequate or not with telecytology. The next thing I want to do is be able to make a diagnosis. And you can see yellow is video microscopy, blue is the microscope. There's really not much of a difference when a cytopathologist makes a diagnosis using telecytology. But there is a big difference in the middle, the more sort of touchy-feely stuff. And that is, pathologists find when they're looking at a case using video microscopy that the case appears more complex for them, more difficult. That's why there's more yellow. The image quality is certainly, they feel much better on a microscope. They feel that they're lacking some features when they're looking at the video microscopy, and they don't feel that confident when they're using video microscopy. However, they are able to accomplish the task, which is say there's enough material and I know what it is. And yes, it does take them a little bit longer. When we ask them to view their cases using video microscopy, it takes them a little longer than if they had to do it on a microscope. But that's purely looking at the case. We're not taking into account the fact that they have to walk over, get to the site, and perform it. If we did that, obviously, it would take much longer the traditional way. So we've had some difficulties. There are some cases that are difficult to view. But for the most part, you can see if this is a thyroid FNA, there's enough material here. There's inclusions that I can call this papillary carcinoma of the thyroid. So the technology works well, it's available, and it's in use. I've mentioned that we tried robotic telecytology. This allowed you access to the whole slide scan. You didn't need someone present to drive the slide, so there was a great benefit in that way. But the image quality was not good enough. When it came to looking at neuroendocrine tumors, it was difficult to evaluate those nuclei, and you need to make that call on site. And so we haven't really adopted robotic telecytology. We've stuck with the dynamic video cytology. But there is a place for robotic telepathology, and we've adopted it for many years now. So I'll share our experience with robotic telepathology. So simply, when you're going to practice robotic telepathology, you need a robotic microscope, but you need someone to load that slide and still communicate with your pathologist. And the pathologist is going to do two things. One, they're going to want to access the slides on a server. So the fact that the images are now on a server and you don't have to move these big images means you don't really have bandwidth limitations. But they do need to send some controls and signals to control the microscope at a distance, the robotic components. And depending on where you are, firewalls can block those signals. So there may be some issues related to that. We're not the first to use it. These are many publications over the years that have shown that if you use robotic telemicroscopy for frozen sections, you can get a very good diagnosis. It's pretty accurate within a decent time frame. So we use it mainly for neuropathology frozen sections, but we have done it for GI and other frozen sections. And what we have is a Zeiss, previously called Trestle system, to perform that function, which is on our network, and we have several of those devices. Basically, what I had shown you is that because you're not accessing the entire image, just an image on a server, we don't have great demand for bandwidth. So we've had now more than 10 years of intra-institutional experience between our different hospitals. And we've had great success, and I'll share some data with you. But as a result of that, other hospitals in other states have approached us to perform neuropathology frozen sections in their hospitals. And so we have been able to accomplish that too. One of the main things was the technology in trying to set this all up between hospitals, even in different states at different hospitals, is the technology with the IT folks setting this up was relatively simple. That was not the hard part. The main barrier was related to administrative issues, making sure pathologists have privileges in those hospitals, the legal issues involved, etc. Those were much harder to overcome. So over the years, the demand for neuropathology, for neuro-frozen sections has grown significantly, and we've continued to perform several of these using telepathology. So the number of frozens performed by telepathology has increased slightly, but the demand is growing up. Now, the one component that we have not developed is gross telepathology, and many labs haven't really exploited gross telepathology. What we rely on now is our PA or resident telling the pathologist that I have two pieces of brain tissue, one looks vascular, one doesn't, which one should I freeze? And so, if it's a GBM, they're going to ask for that. But we are making, efforts to support gross telepathology in a better fashion. What we use is a system like this, which is robotically controlled, slides get loaded, the pathologist at a different hospital logs on and drives that microscope, with focus, objectives, navigation just on their computer screen. But it requires PAs and residents to be trained and pathologists, neuropathologists to be trained to use this system. So that's what it looks like up close. We can load up to 4 slides. We can do frozen sections, tissue sections, brain smears. As I mentioned, we have PAs that are trained to perform this. And basically, these robotic scanners have images that reside on servers that we can easily access within our hospital, or if we have neuropathologists at home or traveling, can access it via the internet. So how good has this technology been? So you can see the first time period from 2002 to 2006, where we did 402 frozen sections by telepathology. Initially, the deferral rate was much higher for telepathology. But as our neuropathologists improved and got more familiar with the technology, you can see from 2007 to 2008, and in that period when they did 262 frozen sections by telepathology, that there was great concordance. Not much difference between doing it by glass and doing it by telepathology, and very few discrepancies, and they started deferring less and less cases. So because of the success, we partnered with a hospital in Indianapolis, and that's 370 miles away from us in Pittsburgh. Our pathologists, our neuropathologists are still on the same platform. So we have 9 neuropathologists that are all comfortable logging onto the system, so that when a frozen section happens 370 miles away, using the same system, there's only one neuropathologist on site, may not always be present, but using a VPN network, our pathologists can not only access that slide and control that microscope, but they also have access to look at MRI, CT scans on their PAC server. We've even allowed the neurosurgeon in the operating suite to be able to view that image. And so we've had a lot of success, but there have been a few failures, and really these are to share, and this is a published paper if you want to go and look at it in the Journal of Pathology Informatics. There have been a few technical problems that have resulted in delays. And that hasn't been so much of a problem, because if you educate the neurosurgeon that there may be delays, and these are our alternative plans for downtime, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. In only one case, we had to abandon the frozen section altogether. So the key is, should we be moving to whole slide imaging? And yes, we are testing that. Others have shown, for example, Andy Evans in Toronto, that if you use a whole slide scanner here instead of the robotic system which we have in place, you can perform a frozen section in much quicker time. And really, it's not, although it takes you longer to prepare the slide and have it scanned on a whole slide scanner compared to a robotic system, the time to interpret, because the image quality is better, the navigation is improved, is far superior. So you can perform a frozen section in a much quicker fashion. And we've looked at scanners that can store 180 slides, which may be an overkill for one slide frozen section at a time. But on the market now are whole slide scanners where you can just load 1 or 2 slides, which can accommodate frozen sections. So we're now in the world of whole slide imaging, and how have we at our institute leveraged whole slide imaging technology to support teleconsultation? So what we did was we built a portal, and some of our fellows have spoken about this portal today and some of the details regarding that. But the portal allows us now to use whole slide images in the following fashion, which I will show you. It's a web-based system and allows us now to accept images, whole slide images, from many different partners. Could be within the same city, could be a different hospital, could even be in different countries. And we have had a great relationship with pathologists in China. That's what the portal looks like. Basically, pathologists get notified, and cases get assigned a number. And logging in, we can support many different file types, whole slide images, and there are 2 different types of portals which I'm going to show you. There's a portal which we partner with the client and we use their server. Otherwise, there's a portal for which we'll accept just 1 or 2 whole slide images in which we will upload the image onto one of our servers. in building this portal, there were 4 different aspects that we had to take into account. In other words, there are 4 types of users in the system that had to be accommodated. The first, of course, was the client. The client wanted to know that this was a secure system. It was easy for them to upload images and data to accompany that. They wanted a system that they could easily check on the status of their case, print reports, and so we provided that for them. Secondly is the pathologist who has to look at the cases. That's your telepathologist, your host consultant. So we had to make sure that they were comfortable viewing these whole slide images within this tool, and that this Java applet could open both when they were at work or when they were not at work. Finally, pathologists did not want to be involved in the administrative aspects of this whole process. So we had to make sure that there was some sort of management happening. So there were managers that had to be able to log into the system, triage the cases, monitor the workflow. And finally, transcriptionists were required to be able to log into the system because pathologists who prefer to dictate, this activity needed to be supported. So as a result, the tool's able to accept large images. We're largely vendor agnostic. We can accept whole slide images in many formats, not all of them, but we continue to add them. We can capture the clinical workflow, which is key because the image by itself is of no value without the supporting clinical information, which may include radiology images. And it's worked very well for both the clients and the pathologists. But the real key really is not only the streamline with the system, but user training on both ends. So there's a lot of user training that goes on. Now I've mentioned that the portal has 2 types of flavors. We have what we call a general portal versus a client-specific portal. The general portal basically is if someone wants to send us a case once in a while, how do we accommodate them and they don't have a server of their own, versus we partner with a particular client and the client has many cases they want to send us on an ongoing, continuous basis, and then how do we support that? So it's much more simple and requires very little IT input if it's just one case once in a while. But if it's a client who's going to send us a lot of cases, our IT department and our IT folks have to be involved in configuring that setup with them. Secondly is, since we're going to use their server, the client, there's no need to transfer large files. So that's relatively easy. But if it's one case once in a while, we have to upload that image. That certainly is a demand on the bandwidth and can cause delays. So we're able, in this case, we only have to support one whole slide imaging format, which is whatever the client chooses. Whereas, yeah, we have to be able to accommodate many different types of whole slide imaging formats, which we've accomplished. Yeah, we organize the files ourselves. There, we have to stick with whatever the whole slide imaging scanner vendor provides, how the images are categorized on their server. Finally, we're able to enter clinical data in these cases, but since we have a direct partnership with the clients, we don't need to transfer that much clinical information, and in some cases, for example, in China, we're not permitted to receive information. So simply how it works is we have a server that accesses their server, and we make those images and clinical data available to our pathologists, and the reporting system goes back to their system. So for the most part now we've used this. Most of the cases have been related to surgical pathology. We've had very few cytology cases received in this manner. Cases usually don't come with just one slide, but multiple whole slide images. We're able to view all types of files, including stained tissue. Our turnaround time has been relatively good. This is a dynamic system, so every month, these numbers change. But on average, we take 40 hours. Occasionally, there has been a network problem, and that's a continuing issue that we are trying to improve. But since we've launched this, we've been able to incorporate transcription services because we found that many pathologists do not want to enter the cases themselves. We found that pathologists need to share cases, so we've built a tool so that they can share. We can have second, tertiary, and even multiple pathologists looking at a particular case. Provision to do post-analytical changes, amend, change things, and we continue to improve the whole slide imaging viewing experience. So in summary, these are the factors over the 10 years that we've found to be important and we've learned from. So the first is The cost is not, as many of you are aware, just related to the hardware and the software, just purchasing these devices and scanners. But really, you need to be able to support financially staff and also the storage of these images. Secondly is if you're going to perform telepathology, even if it's a hospital next door or in China, you need to take into consideration the distance. So there are time zone differences, and in a downtime, you need to make sure that someone is close enough. So if your neurosurgeon is expecting a frozen to be done, you have a backup plan that someone on site can perform that. So education is key, not only for your pathologists, but for the people expecting a result, such as your neurosurgeon. Your neurosurgeon needs to understand that what telepathology is and that there may be malfunctions, and we need to understand from them what's an acceptable downtime or a delay. Obviously, networking sometimes is beyond the control of the department. So when it comes to firewalls and security issues, you need to work closely with your IT department. If you're purchasing devices and servers, you need to make sure that these computers are compatible with your enterprise system, with your operating systems and your antiviral software, because the vendors may not participate. Key is maintenance. Some of these systems we have in place now work very well, but they're no longer vendors supporting these. So our own IT staff and our own department has to support these devices, and you need to make sure that they're available. If you're going to offer telepathology on a 24-hour basis, which we do for transplant services, neuropathology frozen sections, you need to make sure that there's IT technical support available at that same time. You need to pay attention to the kind of images that you're going to be using. Some of these are proprietary and they may not work. For example, in our portal viewer, we need to make sure that whatever kind of whole site imaging or image we receive, we're able to have our viewer interpret those images. It's no good, we cannot ask our pathologists just to look at images in isolation, so you need to be able to have metadata, clinical information. Neuropathologists require access to MRIs and images, so whatever system you have, and we have, for example, with our frozen sections, they have access to PAC systems in different hospitals. The workflow, you need to understand your workflow, and your pathologists, your PAs, and your residents need to understand the workflow. If you're going to be doing frozen sections, can your system handle smears? How many slides? What's the maximum number of slides? How many cases if you get 3 frozens simultaneously? What's appropriate to use for telepathology, and what can you no longer use for telepathology and have to ask an on-site pathologist to participate? You need to pay careful attention to your rules and regulations. If we're using the systems, and we have to validate these systems that they work in our clinical environment. We pay attention to QA issues. The CAP have particular checklists that address telepathology. We need to make sure that we're in compliance with those, and including billing. If we're going to be billing for telepathology services, that needs to be thought of. Which brings us to this point, which is medical legal issues, which are important. If we're asking our pathologists to participate in performing telepathology at other hospitals, you need to make sure that they can be credentialed at that hospital, they need to be licensed in those states, and you need to pay attention to their malpractice coverage. Will they be covered for reading frozen sections in different countries? So some of this is murky and difficult. There's not much guidance on that, so it'll be up to your institution on how you handle that. And although I've put this at the bottom, it probably should go right to the top, is the human factor. Because what you're asking our people to use technology, which is transferring digital images, to view them and share them, when they were really trained not to use them in the first place. And so there's a lot of professional reluctance sometimes. So ongoing training, not just initial training, ongoing training and monitoring their performance is key to a successful telepathology program. So these are my take-home points. Is that the era of digital pathology consultation, at least at our hospital, spanned a minimum of 10 years, probably 12 years. And during this time, we've employed all types of telepathology, static, robotic, whole site imaging, and we've been able to exploit, as a result of this, our expertise. We have a lot of subspecialists, and we've been able to capitalize on that and provide and compete for pathology services both nationally and internationally. The technology, fortunately, has become more cost-effective, which has been great. So our accuracy and our turnaround time has improved because the technology has improved. In addition, our users are more experienced and comfortable with digital pathology. So it's a dual thing. The technology has improved, but so have our pathologists. And as I showed you with the transplant services, the fact that we got in early and that we continue to adopt technology as it becomes available has facilitated us funding more IT infrastructure, more staff to support this, and allows us to progress and move forward in the era of digital pathology. But hopefully, as I shared with you, this is not an easy task. It requires continuing use so that the users on either end and the administrators and IT folks involved feel comfortable with this kind of hands-off practice. To be honest, the technological components are the easy aspects. It's all the other components. It's the users, the medical legal issues that are the huge challenge. So thank you. There are several people to be thanked. I need to thank the top 4 pathologists who've been involved over the decade for a lot of this work, and those 3 IT folks who have been instrumental in a lot of the technology to support the practice of telepathology. Thank you. So right on time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Very interesting talk. I found it interesting that your neuropathologist took 4 years to be comfortable with the system. Is that average, you think?
That's collectively as a group of sort of 9 neuropathologists. So those that were early adopters, were much more comfortable. But as new faculty got hired, they also had to get onto a learning curve. So there is a learning curve. I don't know if it's about 4 years. We're still on a learning curve, to be honest. But we certainly have more senior pathologists who've been doing this for 10 years that are better at it than junior faculty.
It would be interesting to break your numbers down per pathologist to see when the deferral rate went down per pathologist.
Yeah, so we do have that data, but I didn't share that data with you. So that data is available, and some of it has been published, but we have data per pathologist, per hospital, etc. So we do analyze that on a continuous basis.
So do you recall when the deferral rate went down for the neuropathologist?
No.
Just pick it. Okay.
I don't, sorry. All right. So I think that brings us to the end of this digital imaging track. Time for lunch and a couple of talks thereafter, and then the digital imaging track will continue towards the end of the day, where John Gilbertson will moderate that. Thank you.